Al Jazeera Podcasts.
Today, the new facts on the ground in the occupied West Bank.
The land grabs are another way of preventing Palestinians from having a contiguous future Palestinian state.
Between massive land grabs and a secret Israeli plot to hand control to Jewish settlers, we look at what's been going on while eyes are on Gaza. I'm Malika Bilal, and this is The Take. Israel has quietly approved a plan to confiscate large swaths of land in the West Bank. It's set to be the largest land grab in the occupied territory in more than 30 years. That's according to Peace Now, an Israeli monitoring group. They're a watchdog for settlement growth.
We are the ones to say that it was so big because we collected the information about previous land grabs.
That's Hagit Ofran from Peace Now, the Israeli monitoring group that released a report on land seizures.
It is called the Declaration on State Land, but it's actually a way for Israel to confiscate land and to make it available for settlement. And it's a totally different ballgame now.
2024 will mark the peak year for Palestinian land confiscation since the Oslo Accords of back in 1993, with Israeli authorities set to confiscate 23.7 square kilometers in the Jordan Valley and designate it as state land.
The latest seizure is a long strip of land that stretches from the northern West Bank to the Jordan Valley in the east, Palestine's food basket.
You're not just talking about farmers who have been farming the Jordan Valley for decades, but you're also talking about the Bedouin communities who have been centered in these areas. My name is Nida Ibrahim, and I'm Al Jazeera's correspondent in the occupied West Bank, Palestine.
Nida, welcome to The Take. You've been following Israel's illegal annexation in the West Bank for years. How does annexation work? What does a land grab really mean?
Well, in addition to Palestinians losing access to their lands, not being able to farm them or to graze when it comes to their herds or build there, as we know, because they need an Israeli permit that is almost never given for Palestinians in 60% of lands in the occupied West Bank. But it also means that Israel is moving forward with its plans to consolidate the settlers' presence in the occupied West Bank that is considered illegal under international law. International law says that an occupying power is not to move its citizens to an occupied land. And this is what Israel has been doing for decades. And what Palestinian researchers have been warning against for years, if not decades, is that the land grabs are another way of preventing Palestinians from having a contiguous future Palestinian state. And these lands in question are located between Nablus and the Jordan Valley. This is an area in the northern occupied West Bank, and they span all the way to the area in the Jordan Valley that is bordering Jordan, which Palestinians have always eyed to become their border with Jordan. And what land grabs do is prevent, on the ground, any possibility for Palestinians to have such a future Palestinian state and it being contiguous.
I know that our listeners have heard of the expanding settlements for a long time now, but can you really break this down for me? The Israeli government comes in and says, this land that we have our eye on is now state land. Is that right? And then what happens next? What happens to the Palestinians who were on that land or who happened to own that land before that state seizure?
Well, it's important to say that sometimes even before such a declaration by the Israeli authorities, Palestinians cannot access these lands because Israeli settlers build illegal settlement outposts. Now, all settlement is considered illegal under international law. But what happens is that settlers individually or like a group of them decide to build a caravan or bring a tent and settle on a location, preventing Palestinians from building there or going there. And in the future, what happens is that the Israeli governments retroactively recognize and regulate these settlement outposts as proper settlements. Now, when we talk about the land registry, we're talking about Palestinians who have been living on those lands for decades and decades. And because the land registry in the past, before the Israeli occupation, has been a lengthy and complicated process, people did not go through all the legal process because it was understood that if this is this person's land, then that is it. No one is going to contest it. But Israel is using laws as old as the Ottoman rule here to take more lands. One such policy is that they see if there's a land that has not been cultivated for 3 or more years, then they can take it and declare it as a state land.
Wow.
Okay, so if a Palestinian farmer is not allowed by the Israeli authorities to go to such land, so in the end, he's not going to be able to cultivate it. And so the Israeli government comes in and takes it. So there are so many ways that Israel uses to take Palestinian lands, and declaring them as state lands is one such way. And Malika, there are other names that the Israeli government uses to take lands: nature reserves, firing zones, military areas. All of these names are used to prevent Palestinians from accessing those lands, but they are allowed to be used by the Israelis. That's why international and local human rights organizations have been saying this is clearly a system of apartheid that, takes lands and gives them to Israeli settlers at the expense of the indigenous Palestinian people. And again, taking those lands in order to connect those illegal Israeli settlements with one another. So when we talk about settlements, they're not just, a small settlement here or small units there. We are talking about a system. They look like cities. And if you are coming from abroad, Malika, and you take a tour in the occupied West Bank, you might not know that you've left Israel proper and you are now in occupied lands because the streets, the signs, everything around you looks like this is Israel and not the occupied West Bank.
Yeah. So, Nida, Israeli judges have long ruled that Israel's control over the West Bank is a temporary military occupation. You alluded to this earlier, and that it allegedly complies with international law. But now there's a leak of a once secret Israeli government plot that aims to change that. Peace Now released audio of Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich telling settlers in the West Bank last June about a government plan to change the way that Israel governs the territory in order to cement its control over the land. And the plan is to hand control to a civil administration led by Jewish settler leaders.
We created a separated civil system. There is a ministry within the Ministry of Defense, and within that, there is an administration. It would be like a government ministry.
How much of a surprise was this for you? What did you make of that?
This did not come as a surprise. Palestinians say that, yes, while we're talking about extreme ministers like Bezalel Smotrich, like Ben-Gvir, they believe that these are just articulating what Israel has already been planning for years. So it's like a more vocal representation rather than the diplomatic way Israel has been using to win time and continue occupying the West Bank and expanding the Israeli presence and consolidating the settler presence. So it's now being expedited by people like Bezalel Smotrich, who has been getting more powerful as part of the latest coalition agreement. He's been getting a higher position in the Ministry of Defense. There has been a deal that has been struck to give him more powers. When he got those powers, he hired his own people from the same ideology, from the same mindset, to expedite the process of approving and advancing more illegal settlement units. Now, all settlements have been more or less approved one way or another, but it used to take some time. And now what Bezalel Smotrich has been trying to do and succeeding is that pushing for the building to happen faster and faster. And that's why we've been seeing in the past week a meeting to announce and advance the settlement building of around 6,000 illegal settlement units in the occupied West Bank. So we are already talking about a high number of approvals, and he is using the fact that the world is now focusing on the war on Gaza and advancing more and more settlement units in the occupied West Bank.
The future of the West Bank and Palestinian statehood. That's after the break. Nida, you have been reporting on settler violence and Israeli forces' violations against Palestinians for a while. We've talked to you on the show about many of them. And today we talked about Israel's accelerated land grab and the plot to hand the West Bank control to settler leaders. What do Palestinians tell you? What impact would that have on their lives and their livelihoods? Greater impact, since it's already having an impact.
Sometimes it's in the little details, Malika. I was talking to someone from the south of the occupied West Bank who was planning to paint her parents' home as a gift. And her father took her up to the roof and said, "Do you see the Israeli flag over there? It hasn't been there when you were growing up, so it's inching closer and closer to our home. Do you think we should be painting our home to give it to the settlers?"
Wow.
So when we talk about settler presence, we have been already reporting on the attacks, on the units, on the plans, on the political ramification of the state. But we also have people who are not safe in their own homes, who feel that the Israeli settlers are making their stay in the one place that's supposed to be their security temporary. And you know, when we see what's happening in Gaza, when people see how many times people have been displaced from their homes, they think that the occupied West Bank is not going to be spared and that Israel will continue with kicking Palestinians out of their homes one way or another, even if for now, one of those ways would be intimidation. So Palestinians would say, you know what, maybe we should leave. I have to say that, you know, touring the occupied West Bank and meeting people, there's a high sense of resilience. There's a high sense of pride. And people are like, this is our home. We have nowhere else to go. We're going to defend it. We're going to take care of it. Even if they form settlement watches, even if they form groups to protect themselves and one another. But again, it takes a toll on people who have been already seeing Nakba, Naksa, Gaza genocide. What's next? Who's going to be next?
That story is heartbreaking because it sounds as though he and his family have realized it's a foregone conclusion. They're going to lose their property. Which brings me to my next question, because in the middle of this expansion, there are countries around the world announcing their recognition of Palestinian statehood. Spain, Ireland, Norway have formally recognized Palestine as a state. Yet, Palestine's contiguous territory is shrinking as Israel continues to confiscate land. Do Palestinians still have hope for a country of their own?
I think hope is what keeps Palestinians going. This is the only thing they have. They feel like they've been left alone by their leadership, by most of the world. So when they see these recognitions, I was talking to people in the street. They were happy. They were like, oh, finally, we feel seen. But, we have to remember that while these states have done this move to preserve the two-state solution and to protect what has been approved as the way forward for the Palestinian-Israeli issue, you were talking about land grabs that are making the possibility of creating such a state that they're recognizing almost impossible. So you're talking about Israeli presence, Israeli military checkpoints, settlements, land grabs, confiscations, while Israeli settlers get to expand and expand. So, on the ground, there might not be a state for Palestinians to declare their future country on, But again, I have to say that people were somewhat relieved that, okay, maybe the world is moving to help them, but we are losing time every single day, every single month with Israel expediting its plans and its settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank.
And that's The Take. This episode was produced by Sarí el-Khalili, Marcos Bartolomé, and Ashish Malhotra, with Veronique Eshaya, Duha Mosaad, Manahil Naveed, and me, Malika Bilal. It was edited by Noor Wazwaz. Alex Roldan is our sound designer. Plourde mixed this episode. Alexandra Locke is The Take's executive producer, and Ney Alvarez is Al Jazeera's head of audio. We'll be back tomorrow.